Hello. One spring morning, all the children in the village suddenly lost their voices. Not a single shout, not even a sigh, only an emptiness stretching between the houses like a fog that refuses to lift, even under the gaze of the sun. But before you settle in, make sure to hit the like button on this video and subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'm really curious to see who's joining us. Now get comfortable. We're about to begin. You wake to the kind of morning that could make even a rooster doubt its life choices. In your tiny wooden room, the floor groans under your first step, a melancholy reminder that nothing in this village is ever truly silent, no matter how hard it tries. The window is barely a window, a warped glass pane smudged with fingerprints, so that the world beyond looks like it's been painted in flour and left out in the rain. Dawn drags itself unwillingly across the sky, painting the roofs and fence posts with a color that might, in a more optimistic place, be called gray blue, but here is simply mud. You are one of the village children, and although you think of yourself as rather important, you are, in fact, about as significant to the wider world as the splinter you acquire every Tuesday from the firewood pile. This thought is both comforting and tragic, depending on the quality of your breakfast. Today, breakfast is a familiar disappointment. Lumpy porridge served in a bowl that seems to have belonged to at least 3 generations of your ancestors, each of whom scratched their initials somewhere on its cracked underside. You chew in silence, watching a line of ants parade across the table like they own the place. Your mother is already busy by the hearth, mumbling something to the bread dough that, judging by its defiant slouch, is not listening. You consider greeting her, but why interrupt such an obviously fruitful conversation between woman and flower? Instead, you attempt to kick your legs under the table, only to be met with the usual thump against the ancient support beam. Pain radiates up your shin, a daily ritual. You contemplate whether you should curse the table, the village carpenter, or the very concept of medieval joinery, but settle for a silent grimace. Outside, the village coughs itself awake. You hear the hesitant crow of old Petya's rooster, which always sounds surprised to find itself still alive. Smoke creeps from a dozen crooked chimneys. Someone yells at a goat, which answers back with all the dignity of a magistrate and none of the eloquence, all perfectly ordinary. If this were a tale about heroes, this is where you would sense the first flutterings of fate. But in reality, the only thing fluttering is the rag nailed over your window, threatening to finally escape to freedom in the next good wind. Breakfast finished, you perform the obligatory morning rituals, splashing your face with icy water from a chipped basin, spitting out last year's dreams with the rinse. You scrape the crust from your bread and slip it into your pocket for later. By later, of course, you mean when no one is watching. Your mother hands you a list of chores, written not in ink, but in the unmistakable tone of someone who expects obedience. You nod and leave, clutching the list like a secret spell you might one day learn to recite backward. Outside, the world is even less impressive. The yard is a battlefield of mud, straw, and aggressive geese. The geese, who believe themselves to be dragons, hiss at your passing with the arrogance of small town nobility. The sun is somewhere behind the clouds, possibly vacationing in a more grateful land. Your boots are too big, having been inherited from a cousin who died last autumn. He was never fond of walking, which means the soles are almost new, but the fit is all wrong. You are to fetch water from the well, gather kindling, and, most challenging of all, ensure that your younger brother does not drown in the puddle behind the smithy, a fate that has claimed several valuable chickens and at least one pair of socks. This week, as you walk down the path, you run through the list of chores in your head, secretly hoping something unexpected will happen to derail your plans. Something mildly interesting, perhaps. Not a dragon, the geese are trouble enough, but maybe a lost dog, a traveling musician, or even a letter from the king. But this is your village, and here the unexpected is considered rude. You try to call your dog, a small and perpetually confused creature named Button. Normally, Button responds with a hopeful yelp and a cascade of apologies for things you have yet to discover. But today, when you open your mouth to whistle, nothing happens. Not even the softest sound emerges. You frown, try again, and again you are met with silence so thick it feels almost deliberate. Button, oblivious, chases a beetle across the mud, blissfully unconcerned by your sudden inability to command the world with your voice. You shake your head. Perhaps you are simply still waking up. Perhaps your voice is hiding behind a yawn, waiting for a more respectable hour to appear. You stick out your tongue at the geese. No sound, of course, but you are sure they understand the sentiment. They hiss in response, and for a moment you almost believe things are normal. But as you head down the lane, you notice something odd. The other children are not shouting. Usually by this hour, a chorus of insults and boasts ricochets between the cottages. Today, though, the only noise is the slap of feet on wet earth and the occasional frustrated grunt. You see Marfa, who always greets the day with a song so loud even the crows protest, waving her arms in silent fury at her little brother. Not a note escapes her mouth. The boys who would normally be arguing over a stick have resorted to wrestling in the mud, their faces locked in expressions of silent outrage. You try again to speak, anything at all, a greeting, a curse, even a feeble help. Nothing. It is as if the day itself has stolen the voices of all the children, leaving behind only silence and a growing sense of confusion. You stand in the road, uncertain, as the village stretches around you in a panorama of dull, thatched roofs, muttering adults, and voiceless children. There is something peculiar in the air, something you cannot name, something that feels as old as the stones beneath your feet. The geese, it seems, are the only ones allowed to make noise this morning. You consider asking them for advice, but suspect it would only end in hissing. And so, with a shrug worthy of your ancestors, you pick up your bucket and continue down the path, not knowing that today, the day of the spring equinox, is about to become anything but ordinary. You walk the muddy lane with the heavy water bucket bumping against your knee. But the village feels wrong in a way you cannot quite name, like putting on someone else's coat and discovering, too late, that their pockets are full of broken eggs. Each step brings you past more children, and each child is quieter than the last, their movements growing more frantic, more desperate as they attempt the impossible to speak, to shout, to be heard. It is not just you, it is everyone. You spot Stepan, the village's self appointed leader of childish mischief, already pantomiming an elaborate insult at the miller's son. His lips move with all the confidence of a king addressing his court, but the air remains undisturbed. His audience, for once, is unimpressed. The miller's son, not to be outdone, contorts his face into a masterpiece of mockery, but the silence between them is so deep you begin to wonder if perhaps the world has simply grown tired of listening. You pause, testing the silence for cracks. You clap your hands. The sound is sharp, immediate, and disappointingly ordinary, your skin against your skin, a noise permitted, it seems. But when you attempt a simple hello to the girl with the red scarf, your mouth shapes the word, your tongue moves as it should, but nothing follows. It is as if you are a puppet whose strings have been cut, left to gape and gesture at a world that has lost interest in your monologue. The girl in the red scarf shrugs and points to her own throat, eyes wide in a mixture of fear and annoyance. She attempts to whisper, then scream, then laugh, but none of these are any more successful than your own efforts. The two of you, unable to resist the logic of your situation, begin to test the boundaries. You stamp your feet, slap your knees, whistle through your teeth. Every noise that does not require a voice, every scrape, every snort, every thud remains as loud and obnoxious as ever. It is only the human voice that has vanished. Just the voices of children. You, being a child of both logic and limited experience, do what any sensible person would do. You panic. Not a dramatic, running in circles, tearing your hair sort of panic, but the quiet, internal kind, like finding a worm in your bread and being too polite to mention it. You wave your arms to catch the attention of the other children, and soon there are half a dozen of you clustered around the well, each mouthing words, each producing nothing but silence. Someone attempts a game of charades, but the frustration is too great, and soon the group disperses, each child wandering off in hopes that their voice will be waiting for them just around the corner. The adults, meanwhile, remain blissfully ignorant. The baker's wife scolds her husband for burning the bread, her words rising over the crackle of the oven and the grumbling of the old hound at her feet. The blacksmith curses his apprentice for dropping a horseshoe. The air hums with the normal, everyday misery of grown-ups who never seem to notice the magic until, of course, it affects their own comfort. You watch them for a moment, your irritation simmering. You try, wordlessly, to get their attention, but your mother shoos you away from the kitchen window with a look that says, quite clearly, do not bring me your problems before midday. As you walk back from the well, bucket in hand, you spot a group of younger children in the field behind the church. They are playing what would ordinarily be a game of tag, Except now it has become a ballet of silent running and wild, frantic gesturing. No one can call it or demand a do over. No one can shout a warning or boast of their speed. The game collapses into confusion, devolving into a series of misunderstandings and minor fistfights. Eventually, one boy sits down in the mud and begins to cry, silent, invisible tears, his shoulders shaking with the effort. No one knows what to do for him, not even his older sister, who simply sits down beside him and stares at the horizon as if hoping for a sign. You try to speak again. This time, you attempt to hum your favorite tune, one your grandmother used to sing, about a hedgehog and a very persistent rain cloud. The tune is there in your memory, every note in its place, but the sound is nowhere to be found. You open your mouth wider, exaggerating the effort, until your jaw aches, but all you produce is more silence. It is at this point that you realize something important. The world is watching, or more accurately, the world is waiting. The trees along the lane, still mostly bare, but sporting the first hesitant buds of spring, seem to be listening. The crows on the church steeple have stopped cawing and now only stare, their heads cocked, as if attending a particularly dull sermon. Even the wind is quieter than usual, as though it, too, has lost interest in conversation. You are not alone in your discomfort. You find your friend Ivan, always the loudest boy in the village, always ready with a joke or an insult, sitting on the fence beside his family's goat pen, his face set in an expression of deep philosophical gloom. He makes a few exaggerated faces at you, as if to say, well, this is inconvenient. But after a while, he simply shrugs and looks away. There is nothing to be done. By midday, the adults finally begin to notice that something is amiss. The village's usual background noise, the endless, energetic racket of children, has faded to nothing. At first, the grown ups are grateful. The weaver's wife comments, a little too cheerfully, that this is the quietest morning she can remember since the winter her husband lost all his teeth. The old men at the inn raise their mugs in silent salute to the peace and quiet, congratulating themselves on outliving another generation of childish chaos. But soon, inconvenience seeps in. The smith cannot summon his sons to fetch tools. The shepherd cannot call for help when his sheepdog runs off. A mother searching for her youngest daughter receives only frantic, silent pointing from her older children, and she is forced to go from house to house, asking, "Have you seen Katya?" until someone finally shrugs in the direction of the pond. The village, usually so adept at ignoring its own problems, is forced for once to notice. The children gather in corners, exchanging wide eyed glances and dramatic gestures. You and your friends invent a crude sign language, mostly consisting of pointing, shrugging, and waving your arms about. But it is not the same. No one can share secrets. No one can spread rumors. No one can even complain about the taste of lunch. As the day stretches on, the strangeness settles over the village like an extra layer of dust. The grown-ups argue in normal voices, but the children move through the world like ghosts, present but unheard. You sit beneath the crooked willow by the river bank, your empty water bucket beside you, and watch as the sun drags itself here through the washed out sky. For the first time in your life, you realize how much space your voices took up in this little world, and how empty it feels without them. Faced with a world that will not listen, you do what any sensible, unremarkable, and slightly desperate village child would do. You decide to fix the problem yourself. It is a plan born less of optimism and more of the resigned stubbornness that settles into the bones of anyone who has lived too many springs in a place where nothing changes and nothing ever truly gets better. Besides, it is better than standing in the mud, gesturing at nothing, and waiting for adults to notice that something is wrong. First, you decide to try water, because if there is any force in the village more constant than the boredom, it is the well. The well, after all, has been here since before anyone can remember, before even old Elia, who remembers everything, but only in the wrong order, was a boy. If a person is sick, you fetch water. If the harvest fails, you fetch water. If your voice is gone, well, fetching water at least feels like doing something. The well stands at the exact center of the village, as if the rest of the place sprouted up around it by accident. Its stones are slick with generations of moss, and the wooden roof sags with the weight of several disappointingly uneventful winters. There are always a few old women gathered around the well, as much a fixture as the stones themselves, wrapped in shawls of indeterminate color, complaining about things no one remembers and warning each other about dangers that probably never existed. As you approach, the bucket in your hand feels heavier than usual, as though the absence of your voice has somehow seeped into your bones. You pass by a chicken who gives you a suspicious glare, perhaps sensing that you are up to something. The old women at the well eye you with the kind of interest usually reserved for weather changes and the appearance of mold in unexpected places. One of them, Baba Anfisa, waves you over with a hand that looks like a bundle of twigs held together by willpower and a lifetime of gossip. Her voice, surprisingly strong for someone so small, rasps out, "Come here, child. What brings you to the well so early? You look as if you've lost your tongue." She cackles at her own joke, and the other women chuckle obligingly. You open your mouth to answer, then remember, pointlessly, that nothing will come out. You mime speaking, then tap your throat and shake your head. The women watch you with a mixture of pity and amusement, as if you are performing an old dance they have seen 100 times before. "Oh, it is that time again, is it?" Baba Anfisa says, her eyes narrowing as she examines you like a peculiar type of beetle. Every spring, the children lose something. Sometimes it is voices, sometimes it is tempers, sometimes it is shoes. Always returns by nightfall, so do not fret. The world is made for losing and finding, or else what would old women talk about? You stare at her, half hoping she will reveal some great secret or mutter an incantation that will bring your voice back. Instead, she begins to recount a long, meandering story about a springtime many years ago when a goose laid an egg the size of a cabbage and all the bread in the village tasted like onions for a week. It is difficult to follow her logic. She shifts from geese to turnips, from turnips to weddings, from weddings to a man who once tried to make a hat from fish scales. The other women nod, sigh, and correct her on details no one cares about. You try to interrupt, miming the act of speaking, pointing at your mouth, then at the sky, then at your heart, in the desperate hope that someone will offer a solution or at least some sympathy. Baba Anfisa squints at you and says, "You are not the first, and you will not be the last. This village is stubborn. Children lose things, adults forget things, and the sun always rises whether we like it or not." She leans closer, her breath carrying the faint aroma of pickled garlic and hard won disappointment. When I was a girl, we lost our shadows for a whole summer. People were tripping over their own feet, falling into ponds, and blaming the cows. But the shadows came back, and the cows did not mind. That is the way of things. It is not clear if she is trying to comfort you or simply reliving a moment of her own youth, but you sense that further questioning will only result in more stories about misbehaving livestock and the proper way to store root vegetables. You glance at the other children who have gathered nearby, each one clutching a bucket or a basket, each one silent and wide eyed. One of the smaller girls tries to speak, her lips forming a wordless question. Baba Anfisa pats her head and says, "Hush now, little sparrow. Let the day do what the day will do." You decide to test the water itself. You draw up a bucket, dipping your hands into the icy depths. The water is as cold and clear as always, and you splash some onto your face, half expecting a miracle. When you try to speak, the silence is just as complete as before, but now your face is cold and your shirt is damp. The old women watch with the kind of polite disinterest usually reserved for weather vanes and the price of onions. You feel the weight of the day pressing down on you, a day without words, without songs, without the small, constant arguments that make childhood tolerable. The other children mill about, inventing new ways to communicate, elaborate charades, exaggerated shrugs, long and meaningful looks. None of it helps. The adults, busy with their usual squabbles and errands, pay you no mind. Occasionally, one will notice the eerie silence, frown, and mutter something about children these days, then return to their work. It is a peculiar kind of loneliness, being surrounded by people and unable to reach them. You sit on the edge of the well, legs dangling, watching the dust swirl in the morning air. The world feels heavier without voices, as if every laugh, every shout, every whispered secret has been packed away in a box and hidden in the attic with the moth eaten coats and broken sleds. Baba Anfisa finishes her story, finally, with a long sigh and a statement that may or may not be a proverb. Every spring brings something strange. You just have to wait for the sun to do its work. Then she returns to her endless debate with the other women about whether it is going to rain, and if so, whose fault it will be. You take your bucket and wander away from the well, no closer to an answer, but with the strange comfort that comes from knowing this has all happened before. Perhaps the voices will come back at sunset. Perhaps they will not. In the meantime, there is water to fetch, geese to dodge, and the peculiar silence of spring to get used to, at least until someone remembers how to listen. The day drags on with the slow inevitability of rainwater leaking through a badly patched roof. As the sun struggles higher, casting pale and reluctant light over the village, you notice a shift in the grown-ups, a subtle unease, as if they sense that something is amiss but cannot decide who is to blame. You watch them from your spot beside the well, arms wrapped around your knees, your silence matched only by the unnerving quiet of every other child. At first, the adults seem almost relieved by the hush. The baker, for instance, makes an announcement to the empty air about how peaceful it is, rolling his eyes in mock exasperation, as if to say, finally, a morning without shrieking. The innkeeper leans in his doorway, squinting at the sky, and declares that he could get used to such tranquility. The blacksmith's wife jokes to her neighbor that her ears might finally stop ringing. Everyone laughs a little too loudly and then immediately falls silent, suddenly aware of how unnatural it is to hear only their own voices echoing in the streets. It is not long before peace gives way to confusion. The adults begin to notice that their children are not simply quiet, but completely silent. Not a single word, not even the tiniest squeal or squabble. In a village where noise is as constant as mud, this new silence grows heavier with every passing minute. You watch as a group of mothers gathers near the market square, arms folded, voices growing sharper. Someone suggests that the children are playing a prank. Someone else insists it is an omen, a sure sign of bad weather, or worse, poor harvest. The carpenter, who never misses an opportunity to be unhelpful, claims it is probably something in the air, or the bread, or the water, and that it will all blow over by nightfall. His wife disagrees, muttering about curses and ill winds, and insists that her cousin's sister's neighbor's child once went silent before running off to join the traveling circus. You are reminded, not for the first time, that grown-ups are rarely as wise as they pretend to be. You drift from group to group, listening as the adults try to reason their way through the mystery. The men gather outside the smithy, voices low and tense, each one blaming the other for bringing bad luck to the village. One man suggests it is the fault of the new priest, who, being from another province, probably brought some new fangled silence with him. Another claims it must be the traveling merchant who passed through last week. His beard was suspiciously well groomed after all. The smith, for lack of anything better to do, blames the geese. None of the grown-ups, of course, consider asking the children what happened. Instead, they try to speak to you and your friends as if you are stubborn livestock. They shout instructions, repeat questions, gesture with increasing frustration when you respond only with shrugs and wide, helpless eyes. It does not occur to any of them that this silence might be more than stubbornness or play. You watch your own mother as she bustles from house to house, checking on your siblings, gathering gossip, and scolding you with her hands on her hips. You try to explain with frantic pantomime, mouth opening, finger to throat, hands waving in the air. She frowns, shakes her head, and tells you to stop acting out. If you have nothing to say, then say nothing, she mutters, as if that is some great wisdom. By midday, the confusion has grown into something approaching panic, although in this village, panic always takes the form of grumbling and accusatory glances. Someone suggests calling a meeting of the village elders. Someone else suggests praying. A third suggests both, but only if lunch is not delayed. The elders convene beneath the ancient oak in the center of the square. They shuffle and cough and clear their throats, each one looking more worried than the last. The head man, whose authority is measured in the length of his beard and the volume of his size, attempts to restore order by demanding answers. He is met with a sea of blank faces and the hollow silence of children who cannot answer even if they want to. You study the faces of the adults, their features etched with concern and confusion. You see your father, usually so steady, pacing the edge of the crowd, muttering to himself. The schoolmaster tries to take charge, organizing the children into neat lines and demanding they recite the alphabet. The children stare back at him in mute rebellion, their eyes bright with something that is not quite fear and not quite amusement. Eventually, someone suggests that it must be the work of mischievous spirits. This idea, as is the way with all bad ideas, spreads quickly. The women begin to sprinkle salt at their doorsteps, muttering old charms they barely remember. The men arm themselves with pitchforks and lanterns, as if expecting an invasion of invisible, silent stealing bandits. The local priest is summoned to offer a prayer, which he does with much waving of hands and a suspicious number of references to patience and the wisdom of elders. The day stretches on, the silence deepening. The children move through the village like ghosts, ignored except when they are blamed. You find yourself wishing, for the first time, that you could shout, scream, sing, anything to break the heavy air. You watch as your friends grow restless, their usual games abandoned, replaced by quiet circles where they exchange glances and occasionally tears. Late in the afternoon, a new form of entertainment emerges: the art of silent arguing. The children discover that if you exaggerate your gestures enough, you can communicate nearly anything: a pointed finger, a hand on the hip, a roll of the eyes. Soon the lanes are filled with pantomime quarrels and charades, the children acting out their usual dramas in utter silence. The adults, meanwhile, misinterpret everything, convinced that the children are mocking them on purpose. The sky begins to darken as evening approaches, and the village settles into a kind of uneasy truce. The adults have given up looking for explanations, and the children have resigned themselves to their wordless existence. You sit with your friends on the fence by the field, watching as the sun dips behind the trees. The air is thick with unspoken questions, but you have no way to ask them. For now, you simply wait, as the grown-ups always do, for something to change. The silence, you realize, is less frightening than the realization that the adults, despite their many words, know no more about the world's mysteries than you do. It does not take long for the village to remember its favorite solution for all difficult matters, a meeting of the elders. This ritual has solved countless problems over the years, so many, in fact, that no one can remember a single one. It is a solution built on the solid ground of tradition, stubbornness, and the unspoken belief that sitting in a circle and disagreeing loudly will eventually make the universe lose interest and fix itself. As dusk draws closer, the elders gather in the largest barn, chosen because it smells the least of onions, and because its roof is less likely to collapse in the middle of a debate. You and several other children lurk outside, pressed against the rough boards, your breath misting in the chill air. There are cracks and knotholes in the wood, conveniently placed for eavesdropping. You wonder how many generations of children have hidden here, their ears tuned for secrets that turn out to be disappointingly dull. Inside, the elders seat themselves on wobbly stools and creaky benches, forming a circle around a lantern that flickers in the gloom. There is the headman, whose beard is said to predate the village's last bear, the blacksmith, who claims to know everything about iron and nothing about children, the priest, who finds a parable in everything but never the answer, and three or four other men and women whose main qualification for counsel seems to be still alive. They begin as they always do, with loud sighs and declarations that things were different when they were young. Someone says, "In my day, children did not lose their voices, they lost their shoes, and sometimes their tempers, but never their voices." Someone else insists, "Well, maybe once, but no one remembers for sure." This, apparently, is the most useful fact anyone can provide. The head man, who believes every problem can be solved by retelling it loudly enough, bangs his stick on the floor. "We must consider the old stories," he intones, as if about to reveal a grand secret. There is the tale of the equinox, when the sun and night fight over the world, and sometimes, just sometimes, the children pay the price. The blacksmith is unimpressed. Stories are for scaring chickens. What we need is a practical solution. Perhaps it is the well water. Perhaps the bread is cursed. Perhaps we should burn the barley field. No one likes the sound of that. The council is briefly distracted by a spirited debate on whether barley actually causes more trouble than wheat, or whether it is simply less agreeable. The priest, sensing an opportunity for a sermon, raises his hand and delivers a meandering parable about a village that lost its voices because it spoke too much and listened too little. Sometimes, he concludes, silence is a gift from the heavens. The headman snorts, the blacksmith mutters, and someone else suggests, not for the first time, that the priest's sermons are the real cause of silence in the village. The talk drifts, as it always does, from the topic at hand to other, equally unsolvable mysteries. Who keeps moving the stones at the crossroads? Why do the ducks always cross into the turnip patch? What happened to old Ivan's hat last spring? Each story is told with great detail and even greater confusion until it becomes clear that no one is really listening to anyone else. You and the other children exchange glances, your faces illuminated by the barn's feeble lamplight. You begin to wonder if the adults even remember what it is like to be a child, to feel the urgent need to shout or sing or simply be heard. Perhaps losing your voice is just another part of growing up here, a quiet surrender to the routine, a lesson in the art of not being noticed. Inside, the council finally circles back to the original problem. The headman declares that if the children's voices do not return by sunrise, the village will try something drastic. No one specifies what drastic means. The blacksmith suggests sacrificing a rooster, but his wife vetoes this with a glare sharp enough to cut wood. The priest mumbles about patience, and the old woman, who seldom speaks, announces that it is probably nothing and will pass, just as it always does. This is received with a mix of relief and disappointment. Relief, because it means they do not have to do anything. Disappointment, because it leaves them with nothing to talk about. The lantern flickers lower. Someone suggests they sing the old song, the one meant to drive away spirits and bad luck. After a few half hearted verses, none of which rhyme and most of which mention turnips for some reason, they give up. The barn grows colder as the evening deepens, and the elders begin to drift away, muttering about supper and chores left unfinished. You remain crouched by the wall, the other children pressed in close, all of you sharing the same silent question. Did they help? Did they know anything? Did anyone, at any point, actually listen to the question that was asked? You feel the weight of their old stories settle on your shoulders like a too heavy blanket. The adults, it seems, are experts at turning every mystery into a story and every story into an excuse to do nothing at all. Their voices, so loud and certain inside the barn, do not sound much different from the silence you carry in your own chest. When the last elder has gone, you and the others slip away from the barn, the chill of the night nipping at your fingers. The village is quiet now, but it is a restless quiet, full of questions that have nowhere to go. You think of the stories told tonight, tales of lost voices, forgotten songs, turnip fields haunted by ducks. It is possible that the answers are all hidden in the confusion, buried beneath the layers of boredom and routine. Or maybe, just maybe, the answers do not matter. Maybe, like the adults, you will forget the question as soon as the sun rises. But for now, the mystery lingers. You walk home in silence, watching as the lanterns go out one by one, and wonder what the village will sound like if the silence does not end. You are not sure if you want to know. The evening creeps in, not with the proud blaze of sunset, but with the slow, damp insistence of a leaking roof. You notice the smoke from a dozen chimneys hanging low over the village, reluctant to drift, as if even the wind has lost interest in this unremarkable day. The grown-ups, unconvinced by the elders' efforts, return to their homes, but not before arguing a little more about barley, bread, and the right way to salt fish. Their voices fade, leaving only the muffled clatter of pots and the dull thud of boots on trodden mud. That is when the stranger appears. He arrives, as all strangers in stories do, at exactly the wrong moment, just when everyone is most certain that no one new will ever come again. You see him first, a figure stumbling along the rutted lane from the forest's edge, his coat dusted with pollen and the faint suggestion of travel. He is neither young nor old, tall nor short, thin nor fat, but is just peculiar enough to make the dogs bark and the geese eye him with professional suspicion. He carries a bundle slung over one shoulder and wears a battered hat pulled low, as though afraid of being recognized by the moon. Word travels quickly, at least among the adults who still have voices. Doors creak open, necks crane, and soon the whole village is pretending not to watch as the stranger approaches the main square. He pauses there, glancing around with the wary look of a man who has seen too many villages and has never quite trusted any of them. He sets down his bundle, stretches his back with a theatrical groan, and then, to the amazement of everyone present, he begins to speak. You do not hear his words, of course, but you see his mouth moving, his hands gesturing in wide, practiced arcs. The grown ups step closer, forming a loose semicircle. Someone asks him if he is lost. Someone else demands to know his business. The stranger answers with a smile and a shrug. Two things you have learned to distrust in adults, especially when combined. After a few minutes of questioning, the stranger produces a small flask from his coat. He holds it up, the liquid inside catching the last faint glimmer of sunlight. He says, loudly enough for even the most skeptical to hear, that this is a powerful remedy, good for curses, fevers, bad dreams, and uncooperative children. He claims to have learned its secrets from a hermit who lived in a hollow tree and only spoke on even numbered days. The grown ups murmur, intrigued and irritated in equal measure. You and the other children crowd at the edge of the square, straining to hear. You watch as the stranger uncorks the flask and takes a sip himself, as if to prove its safety. His face betrays nothing except, perhaps, a faint regret at the taste. He offers the remedy to the adults. For a moment, it seems they might accept, if only for something to do. The blacksmith's wife, always the bravest in the matter of home remedies, steps forward, but her courage evaporates when the stranger suggests that the afflicted children themselves should drink first. The mothers bristle. Children will not be drinking anything from a stranger, declares the baker's wife, to murmured approval. The carpenter crosses his arms and declares that he trusts home cures and the advice of his grandmother, not the potions of wanderers. The priest, sensing that his role as spiritual advisor is under threat, steps forward and warns of the dangers of trusting unknown elixirs brewed in foreign woods. The stranger shrugs again, tucks the flask back into his coat, and looks around as if hoping to spot a friendlier village on the horizon. You wonder, as you watch this little drama, how many strangers have tried to help this place, and how many have simply moved on when their potions and promises were met with suspicion and scorn. The adults argue a little more, each certain that everyone else is being unreasonable. The stranger stands patiently, a faint smile tugging at his mouth, as if he has seen all of this before and expects nothing better. At last, the headman offers the only hospitality the village can muster, a crust of bread, a place by the fire, and a list of things not to touch. The stranger accepts, bowing with exaggerated politeness, and allows himself to be led to the inn. The crowd disperses, muttering about potions and impostors, and the children return to their quiet games, a little disappointed that the solution has not presented itself in the form of a magic drink or a traveling conjurer. You trail after the group, hoping to catch a word or a wink from the stranger, but he is busy with the innkeeper, exchanging pleasantries about the price of cheese and the state of the road. You cannot help but feel that the remedy, whatever it was, would have tasted of disappointment and old boots. Back outside, the geese resume their usual insults, and the air settles back into its thick, uncertain quiet. You notice a few of the younger children peering into puddles, perhaps hoping to find their voices reflected there. Others try once more to shout, but only manage soundless grimaces and frustrated tears. The village, having flirted with excitement, now returns to its habitual grumbling. As darkness falls, you watch the stranger's window from the street, half expecting him to slip away under cover of night, or to reveal himself as a wizard, or at least as someone with a little more sense than the rest of the adults. But he does nothing of the sort. Instead, he eats his bread, drinks from his flask, and eventually snores as loudly as any other guest in the inn. Perhaps he will leave in the morning, forgotten as quickly as he arrived, his remedy unopened, and his secrets unsought. In this village, after all, strangeness is only ever tolerated, never embraced. You feel the disappointment settle into your bones, a familiar companion, a kind of gentle boredom that wraps around you as the evening cools. The stars prick the sky with quiet indifference. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks at nothing. The village is silent, not just in the voices of its children, but in the slow, stubborn way it resists every change, every solution, every stranger with a bottle and a story. You sigh, a soundless, wordless sigh, the kind that no one will ever notice. And then, like everyone else, you go home, curl up beneath your thin blanket, and wait for the silence to explain itself as the night closes in, implacable and unchanged. Morning comes again with its usual reluctance, seeping into your room like a weak apology. You open your eyes to the thin, milky light leaking through your ragged curtain. For a moment, you forget the previous day's strangeness, forget the silence, the frustrated adults, the stranger's disappointing remedy, even the barn meeting's circular confusion. Then you swing your legs from bed and remember, your voice is still missing, and so is everyone else's. You shuffle into the kitchen where your mother is kneading dough with the grim resolve of someone punishing an old enemy. She glances up, studies your face, and sighs, a sound that seems this morning especially heavy. She tries to say something reassuring about patience, or faith, or the wisdom of the elders, but even she seems to realize that the usual speeches have lost their shine. You nod, point at your throat, and receive a pat on the head, as if you are much younger than you actually are. You trudge outside, clutching a hunk of yesterday's bread. The village is sluggish, wrapped in a collective uncertainty that no one quite dares to name. The adults whisper in doorways and wag their fingers at nothing in particular. The children gather in silent knots under the eaves, communicating through sighs and long theatrical shrugs. Some have taken to scratching messages in the mud with sticks, but most have already tired of this novelty. And then, as you walk the familiar paths, you remember this is not the first time. It hits you as you pass the smithy, where Ivan's little sister is silently sticking her tongue out at the chickens. A memory, half formed, flickers at the edge of your mind, an echo of another silent day, another spring morning, another round of confusion and waiting. You remember standing in the same mud, watching the same adults puzzle over the same mystery. The voices had vanished then, too, just as suddenly and inexplicably. You remember trying to shout for your brother and realizing you could only flap your arms like a startled bird. You look around at your friends. You catch their eyes, and in those eyes you see a glimmer of recognition, a shared memory that hovers just out of reach. Marfa, the girl with the red scarf, raises her eyebrows in a way that says, "You remember too, do you?" Ivan, ever the mimic, acts out the entire morning, waking up, trying to talk, failing, and then slumping into the same muddy silence as today. You remember the end of that day, too. How, as the sun dipped low behind the willows, your voice had returned, first as a squeak, then as a trickle, then as a full blown chorus of yells and laughter and squabbling. The adults, after a moment's surprise, had shrugged and returned to their work. Someone muttered about children's games, or a spell of spring fever. Someone else suggested it was just the way the world worked, and wasn't it a blessing, after all, to have a bit of peace and quiet? No one talked about it the next day. Not a single adult mentioned the silence. It was as if it had never happened. Even the children, after a day or two of jokes about the Mute Club, moved on to more pressing concerns, like the theft of a particularly juicy apple or the secret of catching frogs without getting caught. The mystery faded, forgotten beneath layers of chores and more chores, the kind that make a year seem both endless and very short. Now, as you trudge past the bakery, the smell of burnt crust wafting out to greet you, you wonder, why do the adults always forget? Why does the village refuse to remember the peculiar, the strange, the magical, even when it happens right in front of their noses? You suspect that if you asked them, they would only shake their heads, claim it was never as odd as you remember, or else that you are making up stories again. Perhaps this is what adulthood is: a gradual forgetting, a slow trade of wonder for worry. Perhaps this is why the village never changes, why every spring feels like every other spring, and why no one is surprised when the impossible walks quietly down the main road and out the other side. You try to tell your friends what you remember, acting out last year's silence in a wild pantomime. Ivan grins and joins in, miming the shock, the confusion, the eventual delight when their voices returned. A few of the younger children giggle, even though no sound escapes. There is something comforting in the ritual of memory, even if it is wordless. Still, you sense that this time something is different. Perhaps it is the way the adults looked at each other in the twilight, or the hint of genuine fear in the eyes of even the oldest villagers. Maybe it is the memory itself, stronger than before, more insistent. You cannot quite shake the feeling that this cycle, this silence and forgetting, is more than just a peculiar tradition. It is a pattern, a secret rhythm that the village dances to, whether anyone notices or not. You sit by the pond, watching as the ducks glide silently across the water. Their usual bickering is absent, replaced by a dignified calm you cannot help but envy. You think about the stories Baba Anfisa told you at the well: lost shadows, talking turnips, children who forgot how to speak for a day. Are these just stories, or is the truth tangled up somewhere in the middle? Lost voices buried beneath piles of chores and the endless march of seasons. A soft breeze stirs the reeds at the pond's edge, and for a moment you imagine you can hear your voice, faint and far away, calling to you from somewhere just out of sight. You listen as hard as you can, but all you hear is the rustle of grass, the distant clatter of pots, and the soundless laughter of your friends as they invent a new way to play without words. Perhaps tomorrow you will forget all of this again. Perhaps the silence will vanish with the setting sun, and no one will ever speak of it. Or perhaps you will remember, just enough to wonder, just enough to ask, just enough to listen for magic beneath the dust of another ordinary spring. And with that, you stand, brush the mud from your boots, and join your friends in another wordless game, carrying your memories with you like a secret only the children know how to keep. By midday, when the silence begins to feel like a thick, invisible fog, you decide to do what any responsible, slightly bored child would do in a village full of unsolved mysteries. You set out for the old chapel at the very edge of the fields. The grown ups are busy with their own fretting and forgetting. Your friends are lost in silent games and pantomime arguments. There is nothing left to do but seek answers somewhere no one ever wants to look. The chapel stands beyond the last scraggly gardens and the tangle of thorny hedges, a squat lump of stone and rotting wood huddled beneath the shade of a gnarled ash tree. It is older than any story, older even than the road that leads away from the village. At least, that is what the oldest villagers say, with the tone of people who have made up their minds and do not care to be corrected. The building sags with age, its roof patchy with moss, and its windows stuffed with rags and straw. It is the kind of place you are always told to avoid, though never with an explanation that actually makes sense. You pick your way along the weedy path, the sunlight thin and uncertain through the clouds. Each step takes you further from the comforting sounds of work and worry, further from the shouts you cannot make and the answers no one can give. There is a thrill to this silence, a secret world where no one can stop you from looking for what everyone else pretends not to see. The air around the chapel is colder than the rest of the village, damp with the memory of rain. You stop at the crumbling wall, hesitate, and then climb over, scraping your knee for the second time this week. The courtyard is cluttered with broken branches and long dead leaves, but you spot a few brave snowdrops nodding in the shade. Their whiteness is almost hopeful, and for a moment you are tempted to pick one and tuck it behind your ear, if only to prove that beauty still grows in forgotten places. You circle the building, peering through the gaps in the boarded up windows. Inside, the shadows shift uneasily, full of shapes that could be anything: old pews, a collapsed roof beam, perhaps the ghost of some long forgotten priest. You do not believe in ghosts, at least not the kind adults warn you about, but you do believe in the power of things left alone for too long, in the strange silence that clings to abandoned spaces. With a grunt, you push open the heavy door. It resists, then gives way with a sigh, as if the chapel itself is weary of being left out of things. The stale smell of mold and dust stings your nose. You take a few cautious steps inside, waiting for your eyes to adjust. The chapel's interior is a maze of gloom and odd debris. The altar is a lopsided slab of stone covered in old wax and the scattered feathers of some unlucky bird. The wooden benches tilt at drunken angles, their surfaces carved with the initials of children who must have been braver or more foolish than you. In one corner, a pile of broken icons stares out at you with blank, faded eyes. There is no sense of holiness here, only the faded echo of prayers no one remembers. You touch the cracked wall, half expecting some kind of chill or spark, but all you feel is rough stone and the persistent damp. You explore with a careful curiosity, stepping over piles of leaves and sidestepping a suspicious patch of black fungus. There are traces of other visitors: a bit of burnt candle, a tin cup, a small shoe someone must have lost years ago. Each relic feels like a clue, though you have no idea what puzzle you are supposed to solve. You remember the whispers, how the old women at the well sometimes mention the chapel in the same tone they use for bad weather or taxes. Strange things linger where prayers run dry, they say, or that place is best left for the crows. You never believed them, but as you stand in the center of the chapel, it is hard not to wonder if the silence you carry is somehow heavier here. You are not alone, you soon discover. From the gloom at the far end of the chapel, you hear a shuffling noise, a small, nervous sound. You freeze, but it is only Marfa, the girl with the red scarf, her eyes wide and a little wild. She waves in greeting, points to her mouth, and shakes her head, a pantomime you know all too well. She has come, just like you, searching for answers, or maybe just a change of scenery. You join forces, poking through the dust and shadows together. At one point, Marfa lifts a loose floorboard and reveals a stash of tiny, sun-bleached bones. The two of you stare at them, then at each other, and finally decide not to wonder too hard what they once belonged to. Instead, you search for something, anything, that might explain the day's peculiar silence. Near the altar, you find a cluster of old papers, half chewed by mice and damp with the smell of time. You sift through them, hoping for a secret or at least a distraction. Most are illegible, stained beyond hope, but one brittle scrap catches your eye. It is covered in looping handwriting, the kind that turns every word into a mystery. Marfa peers over your shoulder, squinting at the faded ink. Neither of you can read the entire message, but a few words leap out: spring, balance, voices, return at sundown. The two of you look at each other, breath held, then burst into silent giggles, the kind that leave you clutching your stomach, gasping for air. There is relief in finding something, even if it is only a fragment. You tuck the paper into your pocket, suddenly feeling a little braver. The rest of your search turns up only the usual odds and ends: broken sticks, a marble, the mummified remains of a bird. Eventually, you both sit on a bench and watch the dust float in the pale beams of light. It is, in its way, almost peaceful. You realize, sitting there, that the chapel is not so different from the rest of the village, a place full of stories no one can quite remember, secrets hidden in plain sight, and a silence that grows heavier the longer you pay attention to it. You and Marfa exchange a look, one that says, "We have done what we can." You squeeze her hand, feeling less alone in the silence. When you finally leave, the air outside feels warmer, as if the world has shifted just a little. The village still waits, caught between old fears and old routines, but you carry a small, tattered secret in your pocket. Perhaps it is nothing. Perhaps it is everything. The path back to the village is lined with shadows, but for once, they do not seem so frightening. You and Marfa walk in companionable quiet, your steps matching, the silence between you comfortable rather than cold. In the distance, the geese argue over breadcrumbs, and the world continues its slow, steady turn towards sunset. You know you are no closer to an answer, but for now, that is enough. Back in the heart of the chapel, the musty air prickles with possibility. The fragment you and Marfa found keeps pulling at your curiosity, but you are certain more secrets are hidden in the rubble and rot. As Marfa inspects a cluster of lopsided candlesticks, you poke at the cracked flagstones around the altar. One stone, looser than the rest, shifts beneath your fingers. A gentle tug and a bit of patient prying reveal a hidden hollow, a secret that for once does not belong to grown-ups. Inside lies a thin bundle wrapped in what might once have been fine cloth. You pull it free with care, brushing away centuries of dust. Marfa's eyes are wide as dinner plates. Together you unwrap the parcel, revealing an ancient manuscript, several yellowed sheets written in that same looping, unreadable hand. The ink faded to the color of old tea. You both crouch over the papers in the faint light leaking through the rafters. The text is thick with flourishes and strange abbreviations, peppered with odd little drawings of the sun, stars, and, strangest of all, open mouths circled in ink. Every so often, a word leaps out: vernal equinox, children, balance, twilight, return. You cannot read more than a few scattered phrases, but Marfa, always cleverer with letters, mouths a silent guess. Maybe it's a spell. She grins, then mimes reciting it, making elaborate hand gestures and exaggerated silent syllables. The effect is so absurd you nearly laugh aloud, if only you could. But you are not satisfied. Maybe, you hope, The grown-ups will know more. After all, they are always insisting that children should bring their troubles to the elders, even if the elders never have any useful answers. With a sense of mission, you and Marfa wrap the manuscript and hurry from the chapel, pausing only to scrape some of the mud from your knees. You feel, for a moment, almost like heroes from the old tales, except, of course, the heroes always find the answer, and you have only found more questions. Back in the square, the village has returned to its usual hum of activity. Adults bustling about their endless chores, children drifting through games that require only gestures and shrugs. You make your way to the cluster of elders outside the smithy, Marfa waving the old cloth to catch their attention. The adults watch your approach with suspicion, possibly because you are children, but more likely because you appear to have discovered something on your own. The headman peers over his glasses as you hand over the manuscript, and for a moment you imagine he will gasp in awe, declare you the village's saviors, and read the words aloud, breaking the spell in a burst of triumphant sound. Instead, he squints at the parchment, sniffs, and pronounces, "It's just more old writing, the kind people used before sense was invented." The other elders crowd around, poking at the manuscript with various grubby fingers. The priest, who prides himself on his education, examines a page, frowns, and mutters, mostly gibberish. Some talk of spring and balance, something about voices, some sort of blessing or warning. Looks like a sermon, or maybe a shopping list. Nothing important. He folds it with a careless hand, as if it might contaminate the bread if left out in the open. The blacksmith snorts. If this were truly important, it would be written in plain speech, or at least have a recipe for stew. Someone suggests it is a relic, worth locking in the church chest with the rest of the useless heirlooms, broken keys, rusty nails, a coin stamped with the head of a king no one remembers. The head man, eager to move on to more pressing matters, such as whose goat has been eating the turnips, shrugs and declares, "It's probably nothing. Let the priest keep it. He likes that sort of thing." Marfa, undeterred, tries to mime the connection between the manuscript and the day's silence. She points to her mouth, then the sun, then draws a finger across the sky, tracing the arc toward twilight. The adults nod, frown, and misunderstand her entirely. One old woman pats her on the shoulder and says, "It's good to see children taking an interest in history. Would you like to sweep the church, since you're feeling so scholarly?" Defeated, but not surprised, you and Marfa watch as the precious manuscript is tucked away among the priest's endless papers. You doubt anyone will look at it again until the next time the church mice need bedding. The adults return to their bickering. The headman waves you off, and soon you are back in the square, the afternoon sun slanting through the smoky air. For a moment, you feel as if you have lost something, something important you cannot name. You look at Marfa, who shrugs and grins as if to say, "At least we tried." You want to believe her, but it is hard to shake the feeling that the adults have missed the point, as always. As the day wears on, the villagers forget about the manuscript entirely. The silence among the children is chalked up to spring fevers, growing pains, or foolish games. The elders return to their squabbles, their voices growing louder to fill the void. The children go back to their wordless games, each carrying a secret ache that only those who remember can truly feel. You spend the rest of the afternoon in a sort of limbo, partly proud of your discovery, partly disappointed by its fate. You climb the hill behind the square and sit with Marfa in the long grass, staring out over the roofs of the village. You wonder what other secrets are hidden in plain sight, what else the adults have forgotten or chosen not to see. By evening, the manuscript is just another lost thing in a village built on lost things. The adults are already discussing the weather, the harvest, and the endless war between geese and cabbages. No one mentions the silence or the possibility that magic might still linger in the cracks between words. But you remember, and as the first hint of sunset brushes the sky, you promise yourself you will not let this day slip away so easily. Maybe, you think, that is how the magic survives, not in the stories the adults forget, but in the stubborn, secret memory of the children. With the ancient manuscript safely tucked away among the priest's other neglected papers, and the elders back to debating the merits of different mud for thatching, the day resumes its slow crawl toward evening. For all the grown ups' noise and bluster, nothing in the village has changed, except, of course, the children. Where the adults have filled the silence with argument and denial, you and your friends have started to fill it with something much more interesting: invention. At first, the silence felt heavy, like a stone pressing on your chest. It seemed as though all the things you wanted to say would simply wither away before you could find a way to express them. But as the afternoon wears on, a strange new possibility emerges. What if, you wonder, you could make the silence into something of your own? What if, for once, the world belonged to those who could not be heard? Marfa is the first to find the answer. With a sly grin, she grabs Ivan's sleeve and tugs him toward the village square. You watch as she mimes a wild, exaggerated chase, her arms flapping like a demented goose. Ivan catches on immediately, sprinting away with an equally theatrical limp, dodging invisible obstacles, slipping in imagined mud. Within minutes, half a dozen children are swept up in the game, running, leaping, and miming disasters with all the pent up energy of 100 unsaid words. You join in, inventing new rules as you go. Every gesture becomes more ridiculous, every chase more inventive. The goal is not to catch or win, but to make the others laugh, though the laughter, like everything else today, is utterly silent. You clutch your sides and gasp for air, tears running down your cheeks, as Marfa pretends to be struck by an invisible pie, then collapses in slow motion. Ivan invents a one-legged dance that leaves everyone doubled over. For a while, you forget that you have no voice. You even forget to miss it. The adults, of course, do not understand. They see the games, the wild pantomime, the fits of silent giggles, and assume you are mocking them. The headman's wife mutters about bad manners and cheeky brats. The baker's wife calls out from her window, waving a wooden spoon, demanding that someone come help with the dough. But her words fall on ears too busy to listen, and the children's silent rebellion grows bolder with every moment. Some of the younger children invent their own language, an elaborate system of hand signals and silly faces. They use it to organize secret missions, raids on the Apple storehouse, races through the cabbage patch, stealthy dashes to the river to see who can skip the most stones without alerting the geese. With no words to scold or shame, the usual boundaries fade. For one golden afternoon, the world belongs entirely to the young. You find yourself inventing stories as you play, turning every silent moment into an adventure. A hand raised to the brow means searching for treasure. A tap to the chest means you have found something precious. A dramatic fall is a dragon attack, a fluttering of fingers, a sudden storm. Even the smallest children join in, their imaginations unbound by the lack of language. You realize that you are not alone in this. Everyone is making the silence into something new, something bright. For the adults, however, the afternoon drags on with mounting frustration. They watch your games with suspicion, certain that trouble is brewing just beyond their hearing. The carpenter's wife tries to intervene, demanding that the children settle down and play properly, but her words might as well be smoke on the breeze. The priest, convinced the silence is a punishment, stands by the church steps and mutters prayers, but none of the children pay him any mind. The adults, for all their noise, cannot reach you in your wordless world. The freedom of the day is not without its limits. As the sun drops lower, the games begin to change. Silent laughter turns to silent reflection. Stories become more wistful. You find yourself drawn to the edge of the group, watching as the light lengthens the shadows across the square. A few of the younger children look tired, curling up on the steps with their heads in each other's laps. Marfa, still grinning, finds a scrap of chalk and begins to draw a mural on the stones. A wild jumble of stick figures, animals, and suns with enormous open mouths. The grown ups, seeing the drawings, finally lose patience. Enough, snaps the headman, storming into the square. He gestures for everyone to go home, for chores to be finished and order to be restored. The children, exhausted and content, obey with exaggerated bows and curtsies, turning the retreat into another silent performance. You walk home with Marfa and Ivan, the three of you exchanging hand signals and wide eyed glances that mean far more than words ever could. You feel a strange kinship with your friends, a bond formed not in conversation, but in the shared absence of it. For the first time, you wonder if perhaps your voices are not the most important thing you have. Maybe it is the stories you tell in other ways. The look in your eyes, the squeeze of a hand, the laughter you share even when no one else can hear it. Back home, the grown-ups grumble about how quiet it is, how strange the children have become, how nothing feels quite right. Your mother sets supper on the table, muttering about the price of onions and the mystery of vanished voices. You sit in your usual seat, meet her eyes, and smile. She does not smile back, but her frown is softer than before. The night settles in, and with it a deep, companionable hush. The world outside is quieter than you have ever known it, but inside you feel lighter, full of stories that do not need to be spoken to be real. The silence, for a little while, is yours alone, and when you slip into bed, the memory of the games lingers. You fall asleep wondering what stories you will invent tomorrow, and whether, even if your voice never returns, you will ever really need it again. The night passes quietly, so quietly that you wake before dawn, unsure if you have truly slept at all. It is the kind of morning where even the geese hold their peace, as if the whole world is holding its breath. You slip out of bed and tiptoe outside, leaving your mother to her dreams of markets and missing spoons. The air is cold and damp, heavy with the scent of earth and old leaves. The sky is a low, pearly gray, promising neither rain nor sun, but rather the sort of weather that settles into your bones and stays there. You wander down the lane, past gardens and crooked fences, and notice how the stillness stretches across the fields like a blanket, muffling every sound. The usual noises of the village are missing. The rooster, who normally crows, as if he alone can summon the sun, is silent this morning, huddled on his perch in apparent confusion. The cows chew their cud with unhurried solemnity. Even the blacksmith's hound, who will bark at the wind or at shadows when the mood takes him, sits quietly in the dust, ears twitching as if listening for something that will not come. For the first time, you realize how much of your life is built from a patchwork of sounds: the flap of laundry on the line, the gossip of sparrows, the shrieks of children at play. Without them, the world feels bigger and emptier, as though the silence has swept everything clean and left only the bones. You sit by the river, legs dangling above the water, and watch as the morning unfolds in slow, careful steps. The reeds shiver, but there is no wind. You see a pair of ducks drift by, gliding in near perfect silence, their usual squabbles and splashes replaced by a kind of wary truce. Even the frogs are quiet, blinking their golden eyes at you from beneath the lily pads. It is as if the silence of the children has spread into every corner of the world. You notice the crows clustered on the church steeple, watching with bright, intelligent eyes, but making no sound. Their beaks open and close as if cawing to one another, but no noise escapes. You wonder if perhaps they too have lost their voices, or if they have simply decided that this new, quieter world suits them better. As you watch, a cloud of insects drifts across the river, catching the early light. Usually, the air would buzz with their wings, but today the cloud moves with ghostly silence, as if every tiny creature is afraid to break the spell. A beetle crawls up your boot, pauses, and then continues on its way, unconcerned by your presence. The sun rises, pale and thin, barely strong enough to burn off the mist. The world is painted in shades of gray and silver, every edge softened, every shadow deepened. You see Marfa and Ivan walking along the far bank, their steps quiet, their gestures subdued. They wave when they see you, but the greeting is as silent as everything else. You wave back, feeling both lonely and oddly comforted by their presence. You begin to notice the subtler changes. The sparrows in the hedgerow hop from branch to branch, beaks moving in frantic chatter, but all you hear is the faint rustle of leaves. The village cat, usually a champion yowler, pads silently through the gardens, tail high and eyes narrowed in suspicion. Somewhere in the orchard, an apple drops from a tree and lands with a soft, dull thud, a sound so ordinary that it almost startles you. You wonder if the grown-ups have noticed any of this. You suspect not. For them, the world is a collection of chores and worries, of things to be managed and explained away. But you, forced by silence to listen harder, begin to sense a pattern. Everything is quieter, gentler, almost as if the world is waiting for something to change. As you walk back toward the village, you pause by the willow tree at the river's bend. Its long, drooping branches sway with a motion that is almost musical, yet makes no sound at all. You reach out and run your fingers through the curtain of leaves, feeling the cool dampness, the slight resistance of each slender branch. For a moment, you imagine that you can hear a song, the willow's own melody, too soft for any human ear, a music made of silence. Back in the village, you find the adults already busy with the day's work. The headman and the priest argue in the square, voices rising in pointless crescendos. The baker slams his dough against the table, muttering curses under his breath. None of them notice the silence at the edge of things, the way the air seems to press in, the way the usual noises are missing, the way the whole world has slowed to match the children's hush. You meet your friends under the eaves of the old smithy. You share a smile, a shrug, a look that says, "Did you see it too?" Together, you wander through the fields, inventing new games of observation. Who can spot the quietest bird? Who can find the most silent tree? Who can hold their breath the longest? The day drifts by in this strange, suspended calm. You begin to wonder if maybe the silence is not a punishment, but a gift, a chance to notice things you would otherwise miss. You see the shimmer of dew on a spider's web, the slow procession of ants along a stone, the way the light changes as the sun climbs higher in the sky. Everything is sharper, more detailed, as if the world has turned up the contrast to make up for the lack of noise. When the afternoon shadows stretch across the fields, you find yourself standing at the edge of the woods, listening as hard as you can. Somewhere, you are sure, there is a message hidden in the hush, a secret whispered by the earth and sky, waiting for you to understand. For now, though, all you can do is watch and listen. The world has grown quieter, but it has not stopped. Life goes on, as it always does, in a thousand silent ways. And in the stillness, you wait, hoping, perhaps, for the return of voices or for something even stranger. By the time midday has passed, the silence that began as novelty then turned to curiosity, becomes something altogether heavier, an invisible weight pressing down on the village and everyone in it. If there was magic in the hush of morning, by now it has faded into a kind of dull melancholy, the kind that clings to you like a damp cloak. You find yourself wandering the lanes with Ivan and Marfa, each of you more subdued than before, no longer inventing games or pantomimes. There is only so much mischief that can be wrung from charades. The sun, which should be warming your back, hangs behind a blanket of pale clouds, giving everything the color and cheer of dishwater. The square is nearly empty, save for a pair of old men dozing on a bench, their conversation long since run dry. The adults, who have always claimed to crave a little peace and quiet, now look haunted by their wish come true. You watch your mother standing at the well, staring into the water as if expecting it to explain itself. The baker's wife sits outside her door, hands idle in her lap, her usual gossip stilled. The headman inspects the church wall for cracks that have been there for decades, pretending to be busy. It is as though the whole village is waiting for something, an answer, a sign, a sound. Inside the houses, chores proceed with mechanical monotony. You watch your older sister darn a sock with a kind of slow, fatalistic precision. The blacksmith's hammer rings out at intervals, but even that familiar noise feels distant, as if wrapped in layers of wool. The only voice that occasionally pierces the gloom is that of Baba Anfisa, who continues to mutter to herself regardless of the world's indifference. Her words float through the air, the lone thread of sound in an otherwise muted tapestry. You wander from the well to the market square and back again, looking for signs of life. A group of children are gathered beneath the old willow, making lazy patterns in the dust with sticks. Even the smallest, who usually fill the world with shrieks and giggles, are silent now, frowns furrowing their faces as they try to remember what it was like to shout. You find yourself missing the arguments, the teasing, the silly songs that used to echo through the lanes. You realize, with a slow and uncomfortable certainty, that it is not just as the loss of noise that has unsettled you, but the loss of all the little conflicts and connections that made the day feel alive. Without voices, it is as if everyone has been wrapped in their own cocoon of silence, unreachable even to themselves. The grown ups sense it too. The priest paces the churchyard, brow furrowed in deep and pointless thought. The baker gives up on bread, producing a batch of flat, gray biscuits that no one wants to eat. The carpenter sharpens his tools again and again, finding small faults in everything he touches. It is a kind of gloom that has no source and no solution, the sort of mood that seeps from the walls and settles in the corners. When you try to talk, to break the monotony with a gesture or a wild dance, the effort feels forced. Even Ivan, usually the ringleader of every scheme, gives up halfway through a ridiculous bow and slumps down beside you on the grass. Marfa leans her head against your shoulder, and for a while, none of you bother to move. Time crawls. The afternoon is a procession of nothing. A cloud drifts, a door creaks, a cart rattles by with an empty clang. You watch the shadow of the church spire creep across the square, minute by minute, and wonder if anything has ever happened as slowly as this day. For the adults, the silence becomes a kind of challenge. Some of them double down on work, convinced that if they scrub the floors hard enough or weed the garden thoroughly enough, the world will snap back into place. Others give in to idleness, staring out windows or falling asleep over their knitting. Arguments break out, brief, sharp, and always about something small, like whose turn it is to fetch water or whether the cat should be allowed in the kitchen. These disputes are louder than usual, as if everyone is trying to fill the void with words, any words at all. But when they turn to the children for a response, an answer, a complaint, even a shout, they find only silence. And the silence seems to judge them, exposing every grown up weakness, every worry and regret that words usually hide. You notice the old men at the inn playing a game of dice, but even their usual boasts and curses are subdued. They throw the dice, watch them roll, then gather the bones with the resignation of men who know that luck will not change today, not for anyone. Your stomach rumbles, but even meal times are quiet affairs. The table conversation, usually a jumble of complaints, stories, and orders, is reduced to the scrape of spoons and the clink of crockery. Your mother asks your father if he thinks the silence will last, and he shrugs, offering only a grunt in reply. You finish your bowl of soup and slip away from the table. The weight of the day sits heavily on your shoulders, and you feel a sudden longing for something to break the spell, a storm, a song, a voice, any voice. Instead, then, you sit in the doorway, watching the dusk gather at the edges of the village. The air is thick with waiting. The geese, restless, mill about the yard, searching for trouble they cannot name. A dog lifts its head and whines, more out of habit than hope. You look up at the sky, trying to guess how long until sunset. In the fading light, the world seems more fragile than ever, a thin layer of normalcy stretched over something vast and unanswerable. And so, as the hour of melancholy drags on, you and the others retreat into yourselves, waiting for something to shift. You wonder, not for the first time, if the silence will ever lift, or if, when it does, you will even remember what it felt like to speak. As dusk creeps across the fields, you sense a subtle change, so slight at first that you almost dismiss it as another trick of the light, or perhaps a symptom of boredom. But there is something different about the air, a hush within the hush, as if the whole world is holding its breath. You are sitting beneath the old willow with Marfa and Ivan, half heartedly carving your initials into the soft wood. The sun is little more than a red smudge on the horizon, and the village lies draped in long shadows, its roofs and fences drawn in fading ink. The grown ups are finishing their chores with the dogged determination of people who do not know what else to do. That is when you notice it, a faint, silvery shimmer threading its way through the evening air. At first, it seems no more than the reflection of twilight on a pane of glass, but it grows brighter, more insistent, until it glimmers across the yard, skimming puddles, curling around corners, and slipping beneath doors. You sit up straighter, heart thumping, and glance at Marfa and Ivan. Both of them are staring too, eyes wide and mouths open in silent astonishment. For a moment, you think you might be the only ones to see it, but as you look around, you notice the other children in the village have all stopped what they are doing. Some stand frozen in the lanes, others peer from behind garden gates. Everywhere, small faces are turned toward the silvery light. The adults, of course, notice nothing. Your mother marches past, arms full of firewood, her gaze fixed on the kitchen door. The priest fusses over a loose shutter. The baker's wife is sweeping the stoop, her broom swishing through the shimmer without the faintest sign she can see it. They are all too busy with chores and worries to spare a glance for the magic that weaves itself through the village. The light gathers strength, drifting in lazy spirals toward the center of the square. It pools around the well, catching in the worn stones and reflecting in the faces of the silent children who gather there, drawn as if by instinct. You join them, feeling a pull you cannot name, a thrill of anticipation so strong it makes your fingers tremble. No one speaks. Of course not. You cannot. But the air is thick with meaning. The younger children cluster together, gripping one another's hands, their eyes enormous. The older ones look at each other with the solemnity of those who have seen something precious and rare. For the first time all day, the silence feels holy, as if it was always meant for this moment. You watch as the shimmer swirls, forming shapes that shift and change, sometimes like ripples on a pond, sometimes like the pattern of wind in a wheat field. It hovers just above the ground, brushing the toes of bare feet, tickling the grass, tracing the lines of old carvings on the well's stones. For a heartbeat, you think you see faces in the light, old and young, laughing and grave, all made of moon silver and memory. Ivan, braver than most, reaches out to touch it. His hand passes through with no resistance, but when he draws it back, his eyes are brighter, his smile wider. You feel the urge to reach out too, but something holds you still, a sense of awe, or perhaps a warning, as if the light is not meant to be touched, only witnessed. All around you, the children watch in rapt silence. The world has narrowed to this single point, this moment where the ordinary has been peeled away to reveal something impossible. Even the animals seem to feel it. The geese are quiet, the dogs whimper softly, the cats peer through half-closed eyes as if remembering some ancient dream. The light flickers, then pulses in time with the setting sun, and for an instant, everything in the village glows. The peeling paint on the doors, the muddy ruts in the lane, even the clouds above, all painted with a soft, silvery fire. You feel as though you are standing in a story, the kind whispered by old women on long winter nights, the kind no one ever truly believes until it happens to them. Then, as quickly as it came, the shimmer begins to fade. It retreats from the well, winding its way back through the village, slipping through fences and hedges, dissolving into the shadows. The children sigh in collective relief, or perhaps disappointment, though no sound passes their lips. Marfa wipes at her eyes, and you see that Ivan is grinning in a way that means he will never forget this, even if the adults never believe it happened. The grown-ups emerge from their houses, called by the sudden quiet, but they see nothing out of place. Your mother calls you inside, her voice brisk and practical. The priest lights the evening candles. The headman tuts about chores left undone. For them, the world remains unchanged, but you know better. You have seen something that does not fit into stories about crops and chores and the price of onions. You have seen the world unfold a secret just for those willing or able to notice. As you walk home, the memory of the light lingers, shimmering in the corners of your vision. You try to tell yourself it was a dream, a trick of the sunset and tired eyes, but you know, with the quiet certainty that only children possess, that it was real. You carry it with you into the evening, tucking it away with all your other silent treasures. That night, as you lie in bed, you close your eyes and see the shimmer behind your eyelids. You hope that, come morning, you will still remember it. You hope you will never forget what the world looks like when the impossible steps quietly into the fading light and waits to be seen. The memory of the shimmering light lingers long after it fades, filling you with a restless curiosity that not even the approach of night can dim. Marfa, Ivan, and a few other children gather with you near the old willow, exchanging meaningful glances and silent shrugs. No one needs words to understand what comes next. If the grown-ups have answers, they keep them hidden under piles of chores and stubbornness. But there is someone on the edge of the village who has never believed in such hiding places. You slip away from the square in the gathering dusk, Marfa and Ivan at your side. The path to the woods is a familiar one, though usually you would be forbidden to wander so close to dark. Tonight, the silence makes you brave. The shadows are longer, the wind colder, and every snapped twig seems to echo much too loudly. But you press on, feet squelching through mud and half rotted leaves. The witch, if she can truly be called that, lives in a cottage at the farthest edge of the birch wood. The grown-ups call her Baba Tana and speak of her with a mix of dread and grudging respect. She has a knack for growing herbs that thrive even in the poorest soil, and it is said she knows how to charm away warts and bad dreams. But she is also blamed for nearly every mishap: milk gone sour, hens refusing to lay, mysterious bruises on the baker's shins. Still, when a fever lingers or a child will not eat, it is Baba Tana they visit, always at night, always with payment clutched tight. You reach her cottage just as the sun disappears behind the trees, the sky leaking its last streaks of color into the tangled branches. Smoke drifts from the crooked chimney, and a faint glow spills from the windows, turning the air gold and green. The garden is a wild tangle, nettle and thyme, fat cabbages crowding next to long dead flowers, everything tangled with bits of old ribbon and string. Somewhere, a hen clucks sleepily. You hesitate, then knock on the warped wooden door. It creaks open almost immediately, as if she has been waiting. Babatana peers out, her face lost in a halo of wild gray hair, her sharp eyes glittering like stones at the bottom of a well. She regards you and your friends with a kind of wary amusement, as though she expected foxes or ghosts instead of children. Well, well, she says, her voice gravelly and low. The little ones come calling. Lost your tongues, have you? She cackles, a sound as dry as leaves. Come in then. The wind is no friend to secrets. Inside, the cottage is a confusion of smells: sweet herbs and bitter roots, wood smoke, wet fur, and something like apples gone to cider. The shelves are crowded with jars of pickled things, feathers, and stones. Strange little dolls hang from the rafters. An old black cat sleeps on a patch of faded rug, one ear twitching at your approach. You and your friends crowd together by the fire, too polite or too afraid to touch anything. Babatana studies you all in turn, then sighs, as if she's been through this sort of trouble 100 times before. She asks you what brings you here, but of course you cannot answer. Even tries a pantomime, pointing to his mouth, then to the window, then waving his arms in an attempt to imitate the shimmering light. Marfa draws a picture in the ashes on the hearth, a round face, a sun, a line arching above. Babatana watches with interest, nodding along as if she understands every detail. Ah, she says at last, spring has always had its price. The world wakes up, things try to balance themselves out. Some years it's frogs in the bread, other years it's no rain for 3 weeks, and some years, she gestures at you all, it's the voices of children, tucked away somewhere safe, until the sun remembers how to share. You stare at her, desperate for something more, a cure, a promise, a spell to undo what's been done. Babatana, however, only chuckles and shakes her head. It's not a curse, not really, just old magic, older than this village and older than me. She reaches for a battered kettle and pours you each a cup of sharp, grassy tea. Voices will come back with the night, as they always do. That's the old order of things. If you want them back sooner, she shrugs, you'd have to ask something older than me, and that's rarely worth the asking. You sip the tea, surprised by its warmth and bite. Babatana sits back and watches you with a mixture of pity and pride. She reaches for a bundle of dried herbs and tosses it on the fire. Sweet smoke curls up, filling the room with the scent of summer fields and hidden streams. There's a lesson in the silence if you listen, she mutters, but most folk never do. They're too busy shouting to hear the world talk back. You wonder what lesson you are supposed to learn. Patience, perhaps, or humility, or maybe just that sometimes magic doesn't fix things. It only reminds you that there is more to the world than chores and worries and lost voices. Marfa stands, bows her head in thanks, and you and Ivan follow her lead. Babatana grins and pats your shoulders as you head for the door. Mind how you step, little ones. Spring brings change, and not all of it is quiet. Back outside, the woods feel less forbidding. The night air is cool and clean, and somewhere an owl calls, soft and distant, as if to remind you that some voices are never truly lost. You walk home with your friends, the silence between you softer now, threaded with hope and the faintest glimmer of understanding. When you reach the edge of the village, you glance back at the witch's cottage. The light in her window burns steady and bright. Maybe next spring, you think, you'll return, if only to hear what other secrets Babatana has saved for those who listen. Night settles over the village like a heavy woolen blanket. The last light fades from the sky, and even the geese have given up their evening complaints. You and your friends linger at the edge of the birch wood, reluctant to return to your silent homes, drawn by a sense that the story is not quite over. Babatana's cottage glows warmly among the shadows, its crooked roof and sagging walls looking in the darkness, almost like a piece of the forest that decided to settle down and stay. Through the window, you see her moving about, stirring the fire, gathering odd bundles from her shelves. The air outside is cold, tinged with wood smoke and the sharp scent of pine needles. You crouch in the undergrowth, Marfa and Ivan beside you, careful not to rustle the leaves. There is a hush in the air, not the oppressive, bewildering quiet of the day, but a quieter quiet, as if the world is waiting politely for whatever happens next. Inside, Babatana works with slow, methodical precision. She lays out a cloth on her table, places a handful of dried berries and a sprig of rosemary in the center, and arranges 3 small stones in a circle. Next comes a length of red thread wound around her fingers as she mutters to herself in a language older than any sermon. You cannot hear the words, but you sense their rhythm, the slow, steady beat of ritual, both strange and ordinary. She opens a battered tin box and removes a tiny bone, which she holds to the fire until it cracks with a sharp, dry pop. The cat wakes, stretches, and curls back up, as if it has seen this performance 1,000 times before. On the table, the berries begin to glisten in the firelight, and the rosemary seems to breathe, filling the room with the memory of sun-drenched fields. Babatana closes her eyes, swaying slightly. She traces a pattern in the air above the table, her fingers slow and sure, as if she is tying invisible knots. You watch her lips move, but the words are too soft for even the night to overhear. At the last, she lifts the red thread and ties it tightly around the bones and berries, knotting them together in a small, neat bundle. You expect a flash of light, a clap of thunder, something dramatic to announce that magic is being made. But there is nothing, just the crackle of the fire, the slow rise and fall of Babatana's breath, and the soft hiss of the kettle on the stove. After a moment, she stands, bundle in hand, and crosses to her cupboard. She tucks the bundle onto a shelf, between a jar of cloudy honey and a row of wax candles. She lingers there for a moment, head bowed, then returns to the hearth, pours herself a cup of tea, and sits with her back to the window, staring into the flames. Marfa nudges you, and you realize you have been holding your breath. Ivan gives a little shrug, as if to say, "That is all." You watch Babatana a little longer, waiting for her to do something else, but she only sips her tea and watches the fire, her eyes heavy with memories. As you creep away, careful not to break the spell of the moment, you feel a curious sense of comfort. You do not know what kind of magic you have witnessed, only that it was not meant to break the silence or hurry the world along. It was a ritual of remembering, of holding on to something that is always slipping away, a thread tied through the heart of spring, a promise that the children's voices will return, and that maybe this year someone will remember why they left in the first place. You return to the village, the hush of the night deepening as you go. At the edge of the square, You pause and listen to the soft sounds of the world, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of straw in a neighbor's loft, the creak of a gate in the wind. Each sound is tiny and precious, a sign that the world, for all its mysteries, is still spinning as it should. When you reach home, your mother is already asleep, a book slipped from her hands and lying open on her chest. You tuck yourself under your blanket and close your eyes, thinking of the ritual, the red thread, and the slow, patient work of remembering. You wonder if anyone will speak of it tomorrow, or if it will fade into the same fog that swallows all the village's secrets. Before sleep claims you, you promise yourself that you will remember this night, the quiet magic, the gentle ritual, and the knowledge that sometimes the only power worth having is the one that lets you hold on to what matters just a little longer. And outside, in the hush that settles over the fields, spring waits, balancing light and shadow, sound and silence, and all the forgotten stories in between. By the time you and your friends emerge from the woods, the village is a patchwork of shadows and flickering lanterns. The night has deepened, and the square is empty except for the stray cat prowling beneath the benches, its eyes catching the light in quick green flashes. It is as if nothing has changed, and yet you are sure everything is different. The hush that filled the day has thickened, grown heavier, charged with something you cannot name. You walk Marfa and Ivan home in silence. The world seems oddly distant, as though you are moving through water. Every step on the muddy path feels slow, deliberate, as if your body is only just remembering how to move after a long winter. Even your thoughts drift, lazy and half dreaming, turning over the details of Babatana's ritual, the red thread, the bundle of bones and berries, the soundless words traced in the air. You reach your own house and pause, looking back at the faint glimmer of lanterns in other windows. The village feels at once very small and impossibly vast, like a maze of half-lit rooms you could wander forever. For a moment, you wish you were back in Babatana's cottage, watching her tie her invisible knots, feeling the warm hush of her strange, patient magic. But the night has drawn its borders, and there is nowhere left to go except home. Inside, your mother is awake, sitting by the fire with her mending. The look she gives you is sharp, tired, but not unkind. She does not ask where you have been. She only gestures to your shoes, which you slip off without protest. The silence between you is almost companionable, the kind that comes after a long, shared day when there is nothing left to argue about and nothing more to say. Upstairs, your father paces the floor, the boards creaking in protest. You hear the soft mutter of his voice, a string of half-formed words and forgotten worries. Your sister tosses in her sleep, mumbling to herself as if trying to conjure dreams with nothing but breath. Even in their private worlds, your family is restless, unable to settle into the ordinary rhythm of night. You lie awake for a long time, listening to the house settle around you. Somewhere outside, the wind stirs, rattling a loose shutter. In the yard, the geese grumble, their complaints more habit than conviction. Everything feels stretched thin, balanced on the edge of something, waiting, always waiting. When you finally sleep, your dreams are full of strange images. Babatana's firelit ritual, the swirling silver light from the square, the ghostly faces flickering just beyond the edge of sight. You wake again, before dawn, head aching with memories that dissolve as soon as you try to hold them. Morning arrives with a dull, colorless light. The village wakes slowly, like an old man stretching aching limbs. The grown-ups move through their routines with extra care, as if they fear the world might fall apart with one wrong move. Your mother mutters over her bread dough, her hands moving in circles that never quite finish. The blacksmith stands in his yard, turning a rusty horseshoe over and over in his hands, eyes fixed on the horizon. The baker's wife kneads her loaves too long, turning the dough tough and gray. There is a nervousness in the air that was missing yesterday, a sense that the grown-ups have finally noticed what the children have felt all along. They speak a little softer, glance a little more often at their silent children. But instead of listening, they fill the air with empty words, explaining the unexplainable to each other, inventing new worries and pointless solutions. Some try to restore order in the only way they know how, with chores and schedules, commands and routines. The headman organizes a search for missing chickens, even though no chickens are missing. The priest offers an extra long prayer at sunrise, full of vague references to patience, humility, and the dangers of novelty. The old women gather by the well, sharing recipes for cough syrup and complaining about the price of salt. No one mentions the silence directly. The adults talk around it, as if naming the problem might make it worse, or perhaps reveal how powerless they really are. They try to coax you and the other children into normalcy, offering sweets, suggesting games, hinting at chores you used to complain about. When you answer only with shrugs and silent smiles, their frustration grows. By midday, the grown-ups are bickering more than ever. The headman accuses the priest of spreading gloom. The baker blames the blacksmith's smoke for the failure of her loaves. The carpenter's wife claims the weather is to blame and insists that the wind has turned spiteful. Even the old men at the inn argue about the proper way to count the hours until sunset. You and your friends move quietly through the chaos, watching the grown-ups with a mixture of pity and exasperation. Their efforts to fix things seem clumsy and pointless, like someone trying to sweep away fog with a broom. You wonder if they will ever understand that some problems cannot be solved with shouting or busyness, that sometimes all you can do is wait. The afternoon drags on. The sun crawls across the sky, as tired as everyone else. You find yourself sitting with Marfa and Ivan beneath the willow, passing a pebble back and forth, inventing a new game that requires neither words nor rules. You are tired, tired of waiting, tired of hoping, tired of watching the grown-ups fumble in the dark. As the shadows lengthen, a strange resignation settles over the village. The adults go about their chores more slowly, as if they have run out of energy to argue. Even the priest's prayers grow shorter, less certain. The children, too, have quieted, gathering in small groups or sitting alone, watching the sky with wide, thoughtful eyes. You realize, with a pang, that you are not sure what you are waiting for anymore. The promise of returned voices feels distant, almost unimportant. What you want most is for someone, anyone, to understand what you have seen and felt. The beauty in the silence, the ache of not being heard, the magic that lives in things left unsaid. But the grown-ups are too busy, too afraid, too lost in their own explanations. You sigh, a long, silent sigh that no one will ever hear, and lie back in the grass, watching the clouds drift by. You wonder what will happen when sunset comes, and whether the world will go back to the way it was, or if something will always remain changed. The wind picks up, stirring the leaves overhead. You close your eyes and try to remember the feeling of the silver light, the warmth of Baba Tana's cottage, the quiet courage of your friends. Whatever happens next, you promise yourself you will not forget. The village, meanwhile, waits, caught between what was and what might be, too weary to hope, too stubborn to let go. As afternoon sinks slowly toward evening, the village settles into a hush thick enough to taste. There are few chores left to do, and even the most stubborn adults have stopped pretending the day is normal. Instead, as if guided by a memory buried deeper than any grudge, everyone drifts in small groups toward the broad hill that rises just past the last vegetable gardens, a place usually reserved for midsummer bonfires, birthday fights, and stolen kisses behind the elder bushes. The grown-ups claim the gathering is their idea, that it is tradition to see the sun down together, but you and every child know better. It is not tradition, but unease, and the hope that if enough people wait in the open air, perhaps answers, or at least voices, will find their way back. You walk up the hill with Marfa and Ivan, your feet dragging, every step pulled along by the strange gravity of the day. The sky above is bruised violet, cloudless and endless, a perfect backdrop for the slow, relentless march of the sun. The grown-ups bring blankets and baskets, clutching mugs of weak tea or watery kvass, fussing over seating and who is blocking whose view. The children fan out on the grass, forming wordless islands in a sea of adult muttering. For a time, no one says much at all. It is the most honest silence of the day. No pretending, no busy work, just the collective holding of breath, as if everyone expects the sun to pause and take questions before dropping behind the woods. You notice the ways the grown-ups try to fill the space. The priest stands to lead a prayer, but his words trail off as he realizes half the village is not listening. The headman counts the children 3 times, convinced that the silence must have swallowed someone whole. The baker's wife shares stale bread and tries to start a story about a fox and a moon, but no one picks up the thread. All attempts at normalcy float away on the wind, leaving behind only the low drone of insects and the quiet shift of bodies settling into the grass. Some children play at games out of habit, tag with exaggerated sneaking, silent leapfrog, charades that have grown increasingly wild and surreal. Most, though, Simply sit with knees hugged to chests, eyes on the line where the sun meets the far trees. You feel the soft pull of sleep behind your eyes, but every time your head droops, your heart gives a small, hopeful jump. What if you miss the moment everything changes back? Around you, the grown ups begin to grow restless, unable to admit that there is nothing left for them to do. A few grumble about the chill in the air or the lack of decent seating. The headman gripes about the children's blank looks. The blacksmith's wife starts a brief quarrel over a borrowed shawl, and the carpenter complains that this sort of thing never happened in his mother's village. But these are just motions, like a bird ruffling its feathers against the cold. No one really expects to be heard. You glance at Marfa, who lies flat on her back in the grass, hands folded across her stomach. Ivan sits cross legged beside you, picking at the frayed edge of his sleeve. Both wear the same expression you see on every child's face: weary, watchful, and just a little older than yesterday. For a brief, dizzying moment, you wonder if you will wake tomorrow a different person altogether, voice or no voice. The sun drops lower, inching toward the treetops, painting the world gold and copper. Shadows stretch and blend, turning the village below into a patchwork of half light and memory. From your spot on the hill, you can see the whole of your world: crooked thatched roofs, muddy lanes, sheep bunched by the fence, the old willow by the river. Even the distant woods seem to lean closer, listening. As the last rays of sunlight flare, someone in the crowd, no one is sure who, begins to hum. It is a thin, trembling sound, barely more than a sigh, and for a moment you think you have imagined it. Then another joins in, and another. Soon, a dozen grown ups are humming different tunes, out of key and out of time, until the sound floats over the hilltop like a lost flock returning home. It is not music, not really, but it fills the air with something like hope. You watch as the grown ups look around, surprised by their own noise. Some smile, others blink away tears they will later blame on the wind. The children remain silent, but a few start to tap their feet in time, and Ivan nudges you, eyebrows raised as if to say, maybe there is magic left after all. The sun, unhurried and unsentimental, slips behind the trees. Shadows rush up the hill, swallowing the gold and leaving only gray and blue. The humming dies away, replaced by a hush even thicker than before. You wait, everyone waits. For what, you are not sure. A thunderclap, perhaps, or a voice booming from the heavens, or just the simple miracle of hearing your own voice again. But the world does nothing. The sky darkens. The wind stirs the grass. A dog barks in the distance, and even that feels like an intrusion. After a long time, the grown-ups begin to gather their blankets and baskets, muttering that it is getting cold, that supper will not cook itself, that this was all a waste of time anyway. The priest mumbles one last prayer. The headman tries to organize a line down the hill, and the baker's wife collects the leftover bread with a sigh. One by one, the villagers drift home, defeated by the ordinary. You stay a little longer, watching the first stars prick through the blue. Marfa sits beside you, silent and patient, and Ivan leans his head on your shoulder. The night feels heavy, but not unfriendly. A pause between breaths, a promise waiting to be kept. You wish you knew how to say what you feel, to share this strange mix of hope and sadness. But there are no words for it, and perhaps there never will be. So you watch the sky, holding your breath, waiting for whatever comes next. Twilight thickens into true night, and the last of the grown-ups drift down the hill, their complaints trailing behind them like the tails of weary cats. The world is hushed once more, but it is a different kind of silence, expectant, as if every blade of grass and every stone is listening, waiting for a signal to move. You remain on the hilltop with Marfa and Ivan, neither of you willing to break the spell by leaving first. The stars prick through the blue-black sky in clusters and rivers, brighter than you remember, almost close enough to touch. For a long, still moment, no one says anything. There is only the sound of your own breath, and the hush of the night, and the faint whisper of wind in the grass. Then, as the last scrap of sunlight vanishes and darkness claims the horizon, something changes. It starts as a tickle in your throat, a strange itch, as if you have swallowed a crumb the wrong way. You clear your throat out of habit, and for the first time all day, you hear it, a thin, rusty sound, awkward and miraculous. Ivan sits bolt upright, eyes wide. Marfa gasps, an actual, audible gasp, and claps a hand over her mouth in shock. You all look at one another, too startled to move. Ivan opens his mouth, and out comes a hoarse, triumphant "Ha!" barely more than a croak, but unmistakably a voice. Marfa follows with a whispery "Hello?" that rises into a squeak of wild laughter. You try your own voice and are startled by the strangeness of it, the way it scrapes against your tongue and teeth. You laugh, an honest, ringing laugh that echoes across the empty field and bounces off the old stones. All at once, the hill erupts with sound. Everywhere, children are discovering their voices, shouts, whoops, squeals, sobs of relief. The silence is shattered by a rising tide of noise, messy and joyous and utterly human. You run down the hill with Marfa and Ivan, voices tumbling over each other, calling out words just for the sake of hearing them spoken aloud. The adults, already halfway home, stop in their tracks. A few drop their baskets, startled by the sudden uproar. The headman blinks, then shakes his head as if to clear away a dream. The baker's wife claps her hands over her ears, complaining loudly about the racket. The priest looks heavenward, muttering a prayer of thanks, or perhaps a plea for quiet. Soon, the village is a chaos of voices. The children race through the lanes, shouting greetings and insults, boasting about how long they went without speaking, arguing over who got their voice back first. Some are moved to tears, laughing and crying at the same time, overwhelmed by the simple fact of being able to make noise again. The grown-ups, after their initial shock, react with a mixture of relief and annoyance. Some scold the children for being too loud, others to hug them tightly, whispering thanks into their hair. A few try to ask what happened, but the children are too busy celebrating to answer. Already, the adults are turning the miracle into routine. It was just a passing illness, someone says. Children are always playing tricks, says another. Best not to think too hard about it, the headman concludes, and the conversation moves on to supper, firewood, and the forecast for rain. You and your friends find yourselves in the square, breathless from running and hoarse from shouting. Marfa spins in circles, singing a song with no tune. Ivan tells a story so exaggerated and ridiculous that even the old men at the inn pause to listen. You join in, inventing new words and phrases just to hear the sound of your own voice. But beneath the joy, you sense something else, a strange kind of sadness, or perhaps disappointment. The magic of the day is slipping away, drowned out by the noise of ordinary life. The grown ups, so desperate for answers, are now desperate to forget. Already, the silence is becoming a story that will be told badly, then not at all, until it fades into nothing more than another odd spring memory. As the village settles into its noisy evening, you wander home, your throat aching and your voice raw but alive. Your mother greets you at the door with a relieved smile and a plate of bread and cheese. She does not ask where you have been, nor does she mention the silence. Instead, she tells you to wash your hands and hurry up with your supper. You eat quietly, listening to your family's voices filling the small house, your sister's complaints, your father's stories, your mother's gentle scolding. It is a comfort and a sorrow all at once, this return to normal. Later, as you lie in a bed, you whisper into the darkness, testing the sound of your own words. You promise yourself that you will not forget, not the silence, nor the light, nor the feeling of waiting for the world to change. But already, the details are slipping away, replaced by the clamor of everyday life. Outside, the village is loud again, full of voices rising and falling, laughter chasing complaints, arguments turning into songs. The silence is gone, but you can still hear its echo, soft, persistent, a secret tucked behind every spoken word. And in the quiet space between heartbeats, you wonder what next spring will bring and whether you will remember the magic when it comes. Evening settles in as only it can in your village, slowly, with a growing chorus of tired voices and clinking crockery, and a feeling that nothing peculiar has happened at all. Yet tonight is different. Every child knows it, even if the adults insist on pretending otherwise. You and your family gather at the table for supper. The room is thick with steam from the soup and the jumbled chorus of everyone talking at once, voices louder than usual, as if making up for lost time. Your mother scolds your sister for slurping her broth. Your father tells a story about the time he chased a pig through 3 gardens and ended up ankle deep in mud. Your sister interrupts him. Your brother shouts his own version, and soon the story is lost in laughter and crumbs. Across the lane, other families do the same. You hear Ivan's laugh rolling out through an open window, Marfa's song, still out of tune, carried on the breeze. The baker's house is noisy, with a dozen children trying to talk over one another. The inn is full of old men loudly comparing the strangest things that ever happened in spring, most of them involving weather, goats, or the priest's disastrous attempt at beekeeping. Later, the headman declares that there should be a proper celebration for the return of order. This, in practice, means a slightly larger supper in the village square, with everyone bringing what they can: a loaf of bread, a wedge of cheese, a pot of cabbage stew, a handful of old apples that someone claims are still good for baking. A few of the children try to turn the meal into a game of who can shout the loudest until the adults hush them with sharp looks and tired warnings. As you eat, the grown ups steer the conversation into safe, familiar waters: the weather, the prospects for the barley, whether the new cartwheels will last until autumn. The silence is never mentioned, not directly. Someone jokes that the children must have been enchanted by too much porridge. Another mutters that children will do anything for attention. The adults nod, relieved to have an explanation as ordinary as boiled potatoes. No one mentions the silver light, or the sense of waiting, or the strange hush that haunted the whole village for a day. The priest raises a glass to health and harmony. The baker's wife offers a toast to quiet nights and noisy mornings, and the blacksmith simply grunts that things had better stay normal from now on. The old men at the inn tell stories about how the world was much stranger when they were young. Though pressed for details, none can remember a single example. You and the other children exchange glances, eyes bright with secrets. You remember the shimmer in the twilight, the hush in the chapel, the look on Babatana's face as she tied her red thread. But already these things feel further away, as if they happened to someone else. When you try to tell the story to your mother, she smiles and pats your hand, promising that it's just your imagination and it will all make sense when you are older. You eat your supper, listening to the voices swirl around you. For every loud conversation, there is an awkward pause, someone remembering the silence, then quickly pushing it aside. For every laugh, there is a moment where someone stares into their bowl, wondering what it would feel like if the voices disappeared again. After the meal, a few of the adults try to organize a dance, but the music is half hearted and out of tune. The children run wild for a little while, chasing each other through the dusk, shouting just because they can. Then, slowly, everyone drifts home, drawn back to warm hearths and the comfort of their own beds. That night, you sit by the window, staring out at the moonlit fields. The village is peaceful, so peaceful that if you did not know better, you would think nothing out of the ordinary had ever happened. Yet you remember every moment: the silent games, the shimmering light, the old manuscript with its cryptic promise, Babatana's soft voice muttering spells for memory rather than miracles. Your mother comes to tuck you in, humming a lullaby you have not heard since you were small. Her voice is gentle, a thread of sound tying you to the safety of home and the rhythm of another ordinary spring. As sleep pulls you down, you listen for echoes of the day's silence. You wonder if the adults are right, if these things really do fade away, if the world will always insist that magic is just a mistake, a trick of the light, a bit of childish nonsense. Or maybe you think magic simply prefers to hide where it will not be noticed, among lost socks, in old chapels, at the bottom of the village well. Outside, the moon is high and full, the willow branches swaying in a breeze you cannot quite hear. The celebration is over, but the feeling of strangeness lingers, a question you carry with you into sleep. And as the village settles, you know that something has changed, even if you cannot name what it is. The story of the silent day will be folded away, tucked between the other tales of turnip thieves and misbehaving geese, waiting for the next time someone is willing to listen. The night stretches deep and quiet, the kind of quiet that feels alive with secrets. Your family's house is dark, save for the glow of the kitchen hearth and the thin, silver line of moonlight slipping through the window. The air is thick with the scents of bread, ashes, and spring earth. Sleep does not come easily, not for you, not for the other children, not even for the grown-ups who spent the day chasing away their own confusion. You slip from your bed and cross to the window, careful not to wake your sister snoring in the blankets beside you. Outside, the world is silver and blue, washed clean by the night. The willow by the river casts long, dreamy shadows across the yard. The houses all around are dark and quiet, their walls heavy with the stories of the day, most of them already forgotten. You sit with your chin on your knees, breathing in the sharp air. The silence is gentle now, nothing like the heavy hush of the lost voices. You try to hold on to the day's strangeness, but already it is slipping from your grasp. The memory of the shimmering light is fading, the feeling of waiting, waiting for what you are no longer sure, has melted into the ordinary hush of nighttime. You think of the old manuscript you found, the one the elders dismissed, and the priest tucked away among other relics. You try to remember what it said, something about balance, about spring, about voices returned at sundown. The words blur in your mind, replaced by images. Babatana's clever fingers tying red thread around bones and berries, the silver glow on Ivan's face, Marfa's silent laughter under the willow. You remember the ritual, the night in the woods, the smell of herbs and smoke. You remember the taste of sharp, grassy tea and the feeling of not quite belonging in your own life. You remember the whole village waiting on the hill, every voice stilled, every heart thumping with hope and dread. And then, as the voices came rushing back, a sound so loud and sudden it hurt, you remember how quickly everything returned to normal. Now, as you watch the moon float high and serene above the rooftops, you understand why the grown-ups always forget. It is easier, somehow, to let the world fold the day's magic into the soft blanket of routine, to tuck the mystery away with the outgrown boots and chipped mugs. It is easier to say nothing happened than to live with the ache of knowing that something did. Already, the village has begun to forget. At breakfast tomorrow, someone will mention the silence and then laugh it away. The old men at the inn will say, "It was just a breeze, a passing spell, nothing worth telling." The priest will file the memory alongside old sermons and lost candles. Even you, despite your best efforts, Feel the details dissolving into dreams. But not at all of it is lost. In the hush before dawn, you hear the faintest echo, the whisper of the silver light, the memory of a story half told, the promise that something waits, always, just beneath the skin of ordinary days. You promise yourself to remember the feeling of being part of something bigger than chores and scolding, the brief, breathtaking certainty that magic is real, even if it is gone by morning. You rise, close the window, and slip back into bed. The house is warm. Your sister mutters in her sleep, and your mother turns over in the next room, chasing her own dreams. Outside, the village settles deeper into the comfort of forgetting. The willow branches sway, brushing secrets into the river. Somewhere, Babatana sits by her fire, tying another knot in her red thread, remembering for all those who cannot. As you drift towards sleep, the last scraps of memory flicker and fade. A hand on your shoulder, a game of silent charades, the weightless hush of a voice waiting to return. You wonder if, next year, you will notice when the world goes quiet again. You wonder if anyone ever truly remembers, or if, in the end, all stories are simply the dust that settles after magic has passed through. And so the day ends, folded away in the village's endless ledger of half remembered wonders. The moon glides on, silent and eternal. You sleep, the story slipping into dreams, another lost detail in the long, quiet history of a place where nothing happens, except, sometimes, everything.